Hey everybody, Dr. Mike Metlay here. I am currently visiting the Electronic Music Education and Preservation Project, aka EMEAPP. This is an amazing project that has collected an enormous number of really important, historically significant keyboards, including some fairly famous ones that you'd know from a whole lot of hit records. Their job is to not only preserve these instruments, but also to use them as an element in educating the public and the professional community about the ins and outs of electronic music technology. I'm very pleased to be doing this little demonstration of this beautiful beast, the Sequential Prophet 10. This is one of the instruments that appeared in my book, Synth Gems 1, available on Bukes.com. And before we get started, just a very quick bit of history. When Dave Smith of Sequential Circuits launched the Prophet 5, the original idea was also to launch a Prophet 10. The original design used the exact same chassis as the 5, it just had 2 voice boards in it. The problem is that the very early units came back with heat failures all the time because the box was never designed to handle that kind of internal heat being generated from all the circuitry. What ended up happening was the 10 went away quietly, and the 5 was popular for, well, we all know how famous it is. And when it came time to try and do a 10, Dave did the easiest practical thing, which was he took the existing voice boards that sounded great and he put them in a much larger case. That gave him the option to do a variety of things that the original 5 couldn't do. He was able to provide a double manual system so that 5 voices and 5 voices could be split and layered in various ways. The original Prophet 10 used the same program on all 10 voices. It just gave you double the polyphony. He was also able to add a polyphonic sequencer, as well as some added controls that allowed you to set up the machine with 2 separate programs on 2 separate layers, upper and lower, and produce some pretty amazing sounds. The one thing that they weren't able to adequately account for when they built the Prophet 10 was its size and its weight versus the amount of rigidity in the metal chassis. If you were to pick up a Prophet 10 by the diagonally opposite corners, it would flex. Not a lot, but potentially enough to cause damage. As a result, when the composer for the soundtrack of Apocalypse Now went on location with his Prophet 10, he actually had it bolted to a wooden board to make sure that it wouldn't flex. Now that we've learned a little bit about the history of this machine, let's take a look at the layout. This is a fairly conventional, by today's standards, 2-oscillator analog subtractive synthesizer. For any given voice set, there are 5 for the upper and 5 for the lower layers. What we have available is 2 oscillators, which can be mixed with a noise source, running through a filter with its own 4-stage envelope, a VCA with its own 4-stage envelope, a 3-band EQ, and programmable tuning and volume controls. This is very important because you need to be able to set relative volumes for each patch so you don't have huge jumps in volume when you make changes. All of these controls are programmable. That's why they have the black knobs. These 3 silver knobs are not programmable. They're global for the whole machine. There's master volume, master tune, and the upper and lower balance so that you can get the appropriate mix of the 2 layers. Now, while there are essentially 2 Prophet 5s in this machine, they can be set up to work with one another in different ways. And that's done here with the keyboard mode. In normal mode, you have 1 patch on the upper manual, and you'll notice here on this display, it indicates which of the first 5 voices are being played. Down here on the lower manual, we have the other 5 voices. Gotta love that. Now, if we switch to double mode, hang on a moment, we're now hearing both layers at once. In alternating mode, voice assignment jumps between the two layers. And in single mode, it's a little tricky to demo because the way it works is added voices come along based on which notes are already sounding, and notes are assigned according to whether you've played them. So for instance, if I were to play the black keys, which I haven't done yet in this demo, now, if we add another voice, those are still remembered. Add another voice, and it jumps to the sixth. So we'll be doing most of our demos in normal mode and concentrating most of the time on the upper manual so it's easier for you to see. We'll turn the balance to all upper. Oscillator A, which we're going to turn up on its own, has a frequency knob which gives you several octaves worth of semitones. It has a pulse width control for the pulse wave. There's also a sawtooth wave, and you can combine the two. There's also oscillator sync. Now, oscillator B offers a combination of three possible waveforms: sawtooth, variable pulse width pulse, and triangle. You can also use this as a low frequency oscillator. You can also set it to not track the keyboard, which is useful for undertones and that sort of thing. And there's a fine-tune control here, so that when you bring oscillator A into the mix, you can get those beat frequencies that we all love so very, very much. There's also a noise source, pink noise, and then when we have an appropriate mix of our oscillators, we run them through this standard 4-pole low-pass filter. The sequential filter is a beautifully smooth filter, and you can pretty easily get self-oscillation happening with the resonance. There we go. You can turn keyboard tracking on and off. There is a filter envelope amount, standard 4-stage attack, decay, sustain, release envelope, and again here on the amplifier. Now, one of the interesting things about the Prophet 10 is that it does not have a hold function per se. What you can do is you can set a patch to turn on and off immediately, but then you can also set it using this release button to have a longer release. So now you have that or that, and there is a pedal input on the back which lets you switch the alternate release on and off. This lets you simulate the natural decay of a piano sound rather than something that drones forever. You can get approximately the same effect as the drone simply by turning the release up to its maximum value. These are pretty straightforward controls, although they were pretty revolutionary at the time. You can use the record button to store your patches. If you hit that, you turn off the preset, which means that now the front panel is live. And then we're back to our preset again. So which of the two sounds does the panel work on at any given time? Well, that's selected here, upper panel, lower panel. And then you have 4 banks of 8 programs which are separate for the upper and lower voices. Below that, we have the LFO and monomod sections. You have an LFO with actually 4 possible waveforms, and I'll demonstrate that very quickly because this allows you to do some pretty interesting stuff with layered patches. Along with the polymod section, we have the monomod section, which uses this LFO. It can apply only to the upper program, or if you press up-low mix, it applies to both the upper and lower. You set the frequency here. Here you can set the amount. It can affect both oscillator frequencies, both oscillator pulse widths, and the filter cutoff. Now, what's interesting about the LFO is it actually provides 4 rather than 3 waveforms. This lets you do some pretty cool stuff with layering. For example, here on the upper layer, we have a square wave, triangle wave, and here we have a falling sawtooth. Now, when you go to the lower, you still have the square and the triangle, but here the sawtooth is rising. So, while this isn't terribly musical, I can show you that if we go back to the upper and we can now get these interesting pitch convergences. The other interesting part of this is the polysequencer. This is actually a real-time event recorder that lets you play what you like polyphonically. It'll remember up to 2,500 events and reproduces them just as you did them. So, if I were to give an homage to my good friend Larry Fast and play sequence 14, from his second album, Sequencer, highly recommended. If I were to record that, which I did earlier in real time, then it would sound like this. I'm not quite that bad a player, but you get the idea. What you can do, however, is use single step mode, which lets you control the intervals, the clock frequency on this particular sequence so that each step is the same length, or you can make them multiple clocks, so you can have 16th notes, triplets, whatever. You get the idea. The Prophet 10 at the time was a pretty extraordinary synthesizer. It allowed 2 fistfuls of polyphonic analog subtractive synthesis with that amazing Prophet sound, set up in a way that you could actually do some fairly elaborate compositions on it as sort of a very early primitive workstation. While there is a modern version of the Prophet 10, the Prophet 10 Rev 4, there's just something about this original one, the layout, the way you work with it, that I find really appealing. These machines are rare, and they're a little tricky to move around, but what you get out of them is that very special character that makes Sequential just such an amazing platform for synthesis. I'd like to dedicate this video to the memory of my friend Dave Smith, the inventor of the Prophet and one of the co-inventors of MIDI, who passed away recently. And that's going to do it for me. This is Dr. Mike Metlay signing out from EMEAPP. Once again, you can learn more about the Prophet 5 and Prophet 10, as well as over 50 other important instruments in the last 30 years of the 20th century by reading my book, Synth Gems 1, which is available at bjooks.com, B-J-O-O-K-S. Thanks so much for watching, and that's it for me from EMEAPP.